It has finally happened. You caught it. That overwhelming desire to sit in the big chair. You want to be a dungeon master. You have an idea for a campaign, something sweeping and epic. It may even put the Lord of the Rings to shame. But where do you start? Lucky for you, we have the answer.
It's Your Campaign, Part 1, Preparing Your Epic Adventure, this week on the Dungeon Masters Dojo.
Support the Dungeon Masters Dojo by heading over to Apple Podcasts and Podchaser and leave a review. Take the time to leave a comment as well. This helps make us more searchable to those listeners interested in content such as ours. But more importantly, we want to know how we are doing and what topics you would like to hear about.
Another way you can support the DMD is with a small monthly donation, so we can continue to deliver quality content to you, our listeners. This also helps us to upgrade and replace equipment. Head over to Anchor, to the Dungeon Masters Dojo page, and click the support button. And now, onto this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Dungeon Masters Dojo podcast. This is a show for game masters, as well as experienced and new players alike. We hope to bring you the tools needed to not only be a great GM, but to help you develop as a player. I'm your host, Louis Aponte. Our stars of the show are Scott Labby and Bill Robotile. Let's enter the dojo and see what both Bill and Scott have in store for us today. Hey Bill, hey Scott, how's everything going?
Good.
Got a ream of paper and a bunch of pencils sharpened and ready to go.
Well, that's good. Well, we built a world, so now we're going to build your campaign.
Let's do something with it.
Yeah, let's adventure in it.
Let's go.
Because that's what world building and D&D gaming is all about, damn it. It's adventuring and your campaign. Part 1.
I have a sword. Let's go for a long walk.
Yes. We have a epic adventure to prepare for, right?
Yes, we do.
Dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
Look out, Tolkien. Here it comes.
So, why don't you take us down that path?
Well, the first thing that you want to do before you do anything is determine what the plot of the campaign is.
That'd be the core of it.
Yeah, and then you're going to want to tease it out. But let's talk a little bit about determining what the plot is. I mean, that's probably the most important
There's a
part.
lot of different ways to go. Some of the staples are a hero born or risen, to save the world or the town or the damsel. You also have a team, or your party, that endeavors to save or preserve something threatened. Another popular plot line. Then you can reestablish or find something that's been lost and needed for the greater good.
Yeah, and once you have that kind of figured out, it doesn't have to be a really detailed kind of plot. You just got to figure out the big story, the broad brush strokes, if you will, just enough to spark an interest in your group. And for you to have an idea of, what direction the campaign's going in. But then you want to kind of tease it out. Like they do with movies. Only you don't want to put, all the awesome stuff in the movie, the teaser, because then people go and they're like, you know what? There was 2.5 minutes of good stuff, and it was all in the damn teaser, and the rest was rubbish. Right? So tease it out, though. Build that excitement and that interest in your gaming group. It's kind of a cool thing to do to get your players interested. And we have a Facebook page that was built a while ago. Todd put it together when, all that Facey time and everything was, big. And
well, let's not confuse that with our current Facebook page. This is our
groups. Yeah, our private groups Facebook page. We teased out, I think, the last 12 adventures that we did for our long week on there.
Yes.
Just little things to kind of build that excitement. Once
little
our
hints, little questions. Yeah. What is so-and-so going to do about this.
Yeah, and this is what happened last time, and here's what's coming, and everything, and but you want to keep it brief, right?
Not a lot of details. Keep it brief, just enough to kind of pique interest.
Yeah, an appetizer, if you will, because if it's too long, they're going to lose interest. The world's a busy place, and your players aren't going to want to read like a 12-page dissertation. So a couple short paragraphs.
That's sleepy time in my world.
That is, and I can never make it through anything that long. Give me a little bit.
Yep.
A little bit to kind of wet the whistle, an appetizer, before I hit the buffet line, that will be the campaign.
All right, Scott. So what's your favorite format? What format do you seem to go to? You have episodic, you're player-driven, and you have series. Which are the three big ones? So which one do you think is going to be, which one do you like the most?
That's a tricky question. I think every one of them has their place. Like, I like to mush them all together.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Let's see if your recipe follows mine.
Okay. Like, I like an episodic campaign for our Monday nights. And the reason why I really like that is because being adults, we have adulting to do. So sometimes we can't always make it to our Monday night games. But with an episodic adventure, an episodic campaign, you could get past an episode, so to speak, in a night of gaming. But I like to add a player-driven component to that. So you have the episode that's happening that night, but then there's kind of like that overarching kind of player story that takes up, it's kind of like happening in the background, and you're building up to something bigger. And we had a lot of success with our episodic city-based campaign.
Very much so. It's very, very popular.
And we had guest it was very much so like a TV show, because it was a pretty large cast of characters.
Yep.
And occasionally we'd have some folks come in who, like Larry. Larry doesn't normally make it to the Monday night games. He's got his own adulting he's got to do, but once in a while he'll just magically appear.
Yes. That's because someone looked in the mirror and said his name 3 times.
3 times. And that works, really. Unfortunately, Larry's pretty benign, so no one's getting axe murdered or anything like all those other entities that you conjure in mirrors. But he would pop in every now and again, and he would have a character that he would play. And it was almost like, these characters that kind of floated in and out of like Xena Warrior Princess and Hercules: The Legendary Journeys there. Whoever the Bruce Campbell guy was, he would pop in. That was kind of like what Larry was. Larry was our Bruce Campbell in our adventure.
Sorry, Larry, you're just not that good looking, but with
and you don't have the jaw.
Right.
That's a hell of a jaw that man has.
Yes.
But we had like GMs that would rotate through as well. So everybody kind of sat in the GM's chair, kind of like, you get a director, a bunch of different directors on a TV show. So it was pretty cool. And then you add that like kind of player driven component to it. And I thought it was really neat.
Now, see, I followed a very, very similar. I start with episodic, especially if I'm dealing with something that I hope will draw out longer. From there, I'll drop hints in every episode to help bolster a more series-driven, so I can write for a longer campaign. But I use the plot and parallel plots on the story, the character-driven stuff. So if you're running a parallel plot along with everything else on your character-driven stuff, if a particular player, i.e. character, is not there, it doesn't detract from anything else. You can say, all right, they're off to the side following their thing.
And that's one of the really good things about an episodic campaign.
Right. And then you can stick with your episodic. Everyone else is carrying on the main plot. You're still dropping your hints for your series so you can carry it longer if you need to. But you always have a place for your characters to shine independently with your character-driven plot lines.
Yeah. Prep time, I think, is a lot easier with an episodic campaign.
Yes.
you're just doing all you got to do is account for about 4 or 5 hours of your time.
Yeah. 4 to 6 encounters, and boom, you're done.
Yeah.
And whatever develops, and that gets put to your parallel plot lines.
In the Donnelly Files, the little kind of side superhero campaign that we deviate to every now and again when we need a break from D&D is probably the purest of episodic, almost like the 80s and 90s TV shows, where it's almost like the one that happened before it never happened.
Yes.
You know, you just don't really hear it mentioned. It's very convenient, but
every episode's encapsulated.
Yeah, and the story arc kind of be lost in an episodic campaign. So if you're really looking for a story arc, episodic may not be the best option.
Not a pure
doable.
episodic. Not a pure episodic. Like
Certainly
I said, you drop hints for that you could germinate later on for a series.
Yeah. Player-driven campaigns are probably my least favorite because it's all kind of the whimsy of the players, and it's hard to kind of get a story down. It's a big sandbox.
It depends on, that's just exactly it. It depends on who's feeling Olympic that day, and they seem to step forward and take it off, and 2 or 3 people have always come to the forefront, so you try to write something for those 2 to 3 to get some kind of structure, and then Lou decides he's going to take over that week, and Lou steps to the front and goes, all right, soapbox is mine. Great for Lou, but I didn't write for Lou. Crap.
Yeah, that's that makes it really, really hard. You run into some unique problems where there's almost like a meandering feel to it, and aimlessness can run rampant if you're not tricky. I think you need to start a player-driven campaign almost like a railroad. You got to railroad them a little bit and then kind of turn the reins over. But even then, it's not.
And then you're going to have to try to get them back on the tracks, and that's not going to be easy.
And that's a lot of wasted time. That's a lot of missed opportunities for some good, like, cooperative storytelling.
That's what I like to keep. Like I said, I'd like to keep it as a parallel, but not as part of the main plot, so they can have their little tangents if they want, but it doesn't detract from the main plot.
Yeah, I think in an episodic or epic campaign, you can still have a great deal of player agency without railroading the players, or without having the players kind of meandering aimlessly. I think you can very artfully do that. But the player-driven campaign is probably my least favorite.
As is mine. I mean, it's a good point to use, but not as the focal point.
Yeah, a short player-driven campaign can be really, really, really fun. We did I don't know if it was on purpose. But
there's not a lot of things we do on purpose.
I recall one of our GMs with our city-based campaign. They kind of had a heavy player-driven component, and I think it was just a total loss of control, and it was like absolute bedlam. There were riots breaking out. People were shouting like their benefactor's name out in the streets. There was a battle with the city. It was and these are not for our listeners. Just to give you an idea, these were not like adolescents or 10 or 11-year-olds. These were men in their late 40s, early 50s. These were adults,
seasoned players too,
and seasoned players that they ran amok all over this 4x8 table, and it was in.
They stole the carriage from their benefactor and then ran over the general public in the streets.
It was a damn nightmare. Is what it was. It was a damn nightmare.
It was.
It's like someone opened the doors to the barn and spanked every one of the horses, and they just ran out. It was a running of the bulls.
And Lou was at the door setting them afire as they were going.
Somebody had to do it. But I have a question now. So for a beginning GM, what would be the best way for them to start? Would it be episodic?
Episodic.
Yeah, hands down, episodic is
absolutely.
probably the best way to kind of.
Because that's how you eat the elephant, one bite at a time.
That's right. You're writing short stories instead of like a novel,
Right.
and I think it's a lot easier.
Very much so.
My absolute favorite, and this is why I like our long game so much. My absolute favorite is the epic tale. That's the way to go. I love that. I like big heroism, sweeping, just majesty. I want like blockbuster movie and not the A-Team every Thursday.
But you have to do that with a seasoned table that's ready for it.
You do. You absolutely do.
Our table expects it now.
Yeah.
It expects it.
Yeah.
If it's anything less than, they are, what the frick is
yeah,
that
you
crap
guys-
you just pitched at us?
You guys slacked off.
Yeah, what'd you do? Did you get
I'm
drunk?
not getting my money's worth.
Yeah, they expect it now. I mean, after 12 years, they probably should because we've delivered sweeping epic
Yeah.
stories for 12 years straight. So,
Also, with the epic stories comes a lot of homework.
yes, it is a lot more work.
Huge amount of homework. And I think, well, Bill could tell you this, when we write for our week-long getaway, and we've said this before, these are 5 8 to 9 hour days and 1 4-hour day.
Yes,
We spend like the whole year
yes.
up to that point. We give ourselves a month off. We go in February, we take March off, and then in April we're talking about it. We're plotting things out, and it takes a lot, and it's hard to do if you're doing it every week.
Yes, and to that point too, a lot of times, especially when we write in trilogies. By year one, we have the core for year two and a hint of year three.
Yeah.
Right. But
And that starts, but we're writing 3 years out in advance. So yes, it takes a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of getting together.
I remember when we were alternating GMs. I mean, I did that one week. It took me about 6 months just to get something that I thought was decent. I don't know how it really was, but I think when Eric ran his, he did about 6 to 9 months of writing. Who else? I'm trying to remember who else ran.
Oh, that's it.
That's it.
That's why I could use a break, Lou.
I told you I would do another one.
But the payoff. The payoff
is huge
big.
on the sweeping
Really,
epic
really big.
rights. Yeah, it is huge, but you have to be ready for it. You have to be seasoned. Get some episodes get some short series done. Run a campaign that goes 2, 3, 4 months.
Yeah,
and then look for maybe a little bit longer. I mean, the average lifespan on scenarios on most of our tables is between 5 to 7 years.
yeah.
That's the average span of a scenario.
It's the payoff is huge with an epic tale. Huge, huge, huge. There's nothing more gratifying than seeing your players like really into it when they're at the table, and then hearing your players talk about it away from the table.
Yes. Every time you get together with one of them, even if it's not even game associated, eventually it's going to come around to, okay, just a real quick question. On your last adventure, blah, 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 blah. It always seems to come around it because it's in their thoughts constantly.
Now, I know you guys both said this. You guys say you usually start at the end.
Yeah.
Very oftenly.
Why?
You can't know how to get to somewhere unless you know where you're going.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best explanation for it. It's where's the ending going to be?
Yep.
Once you get the ending, and there was 1 year that it was the
intro was the ending.
It was that was the year that we killed some key characters.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And we were talking about the ending, and it's like, okay, well, it's time for these guys to go, and these were like key NPCs. We never like plan to kill characters. We don't have to. People usually do something outlandish to get it done.
Speak for yourself.
And I wrote the ending. I wrote the ending, the very, very last part, and to kind of wrap up the whole 7 years. And then we determined how each of those NPCs were going to die based on basically their life was up until that point. So it was almost like coming full circle. And then we backtracked. Okay, how do we get here? And I find that's the easiest way to do it, because ending things always seems to be a lot harder than starting things.
Yeah. Yep. Well put. Like I said, we did discuss the ending a number of times and how we wanted to go about it. And, of course, the ending grew. We had the kernel of the thought, this is how we want to end it. We didn't have everything written. We didn't have all the encounters written, but we knew how we wanted to end. And then it became larger as everything that preceded it was being built. So as we built up, we would constantly rehash everything we already wrote and add a little bit more to it. And then we'd back up, towards the beginning again, and then come back towards the ending again and rewrite. So everything kept getting built up a little bit more. So you got that epic sweeping feel because it was layer upon layer upon layer, and everything that we wrote recently, which is creeping closer to the beginning, would ripple implications all the way through to the ending. So you'd have to go all the way through and make all these little tweaks and everything. But the end result was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it really went well, better than I expected. And one of those key things. And now this was not just an ending to an episode in the campaign. This was an ending to the campaign itself. So those are tricky because you kind of have to tie everything that came before it, together.
Not just in that 1 week that we're talking about. You're talking about the 2 years previous as well.
Yeah, well, in this case, it was six that came before it.
Yep.
And that was tricky to do, but the payoff was big. But one of the keys to that is, the endings kind of have to be loose enough so that you don't railroad the players. Players hate to be railroaded, and it's no fun when it's a railroad.
Oh, you don't want to railroad yourself either. You want to get yourself into a corner because then you look unprepared and you're scrambling.
And then you have to do a time travel episode afterwards, when you write yourself into the corner. Yeah, it was all a dream or one of those things. You don't ever want to do that. So I just put down bullet points. Bullet points are my favorite thing to use. So if there's a final showdown between the party and the big bad, it's going to happen at a fortress, top of a mountain. It's going to be at the highest point of the fortress. So there's a potential of the big bad or some party members plummeting from that high point to their death below. That's about as far as I will get. This is how it's going to be the big showdown. But how they get there is still kind of pretty loose.
Right. Well, I mean, you can bound. You got the big bad and his minions who are always harrying him. So you're building those. You also you have to consider, is the big bad is the unveiling is at the end, or does he keep cropping up to, even if it's just a name or a brief glimpse, or, okay, you're battling these other minions and there's this one person standing in the back doing nothing and the battle's turning your way, not the minions' way, and he just kind of turns and fades away and you run after him, he's gone. And he keeps doing this, so you have to determine how you're going to unveil your big bad. Is it in little snippets and hints here and there, or is it just all of a sudden, surprise, hey, there's this giant monstrous thing or person, go defeat him now?
Yeah, you want to build up to that. You want to build up to the showdown with the big bad guy. Star Wars is a good example. You see Palpatine kind of in the first one a little bit. He's like a hologram.
Yep.
And then, you see a little bit more in The Empire Strikes Back, and finally you get that showdown with him in Return of the Jedi. You always know Darth Vader's he's a bad guy, but he's not like the big bad. I think Palpatine is. But you get little tastes of him.
Right.
Just enough to know that, this guy's a real jerk. We want to kill him. That's kind of...
I think that's a fun way to unveil the big bad.
Yeah.
Not just the pull back the curtain and there's the monster, there's the big bad, here's the super mage. little hints here and there. You
Yeah,
know, let him build the tension, and as well as, okay, as your character starts developing, so does his minions, and he's still the big bad. So how bad is this guy really?
Yeah, you don't want to have your big bad's reveal be like that jester thing on the spring, when you open the box, or the Jack in the Box thing.
Yeah.
Just boing, here's the big bad. They're going to be like, the players are going to be like, who the hell's this guy? And why do I care? You want to spend some time making them like really dislike him. Like, I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to go, or this gal, I'm going to go find him in his fortress. I'm going to, we're going to cross swords. There's going to be a fight.
And then I'm going to burn his corpse. And then I'm going to huck it into the moat. Then I'm going to set the moat on fire. And then I'm going to put alligators in the moat.
Yeah, you gotta.
You really, really want to do them.
Yeah, you want it. Like everybody, when Joffrey was poisoned, people were like, "Good," Look,
he's purple. I like that shade.
Good. I'm just sorry no one wrapped their fingers around the kid's throat, take him out, because he was like a very unlikable character, which I think was done on purpose.
Yes.
And, I'm sure the actor's a nice man, but people really were like, you got your just desserts, and I think your players need that too. I think they need to just be out of reach of the big bad until that final confrontation with him, that big showdown.
Right. I think another fun twist is if your big bad is player driven and it turns out to be someone from one of their backgrounds.
Yeah, I recently had that with Korik.
Yes.
And he seemed very satisfied with it. And unfortunately, it was we were playing online because of the pandemic. But I could see like I could see his facial expressions where he was very pleased with it, and he was like he was waiting, a long time for it, and he was very happy to have finally taken out that guy from his past, and it was actually a very, very efficient taking out of the big bad. But we've talked a lot about the big bad, but you really can't have one until you build one.
This is true.
But before we do that, how about a word from our sponsor?
Okay, we're back.
Yeah, and we have to build the big bad. I mean, that's the most important thing, right? You got to have a bad guy for your good guys to defeat.
Yep.
So
let's put pen to paper and see what we come up with.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like the most enjoyable part of my campaign planning. Next to the epic ending, I like to build that bad guy.
Yep.
I think it's fun. Villains are oftentimes a lot cooler than the heroes. Darth Vader, way cooler than Luke Skywalker or anybody else. Sauron, way cooler than any of the heroes. Saruman was pretty cool. Saruman was cool because Christopher Lee played him, and Christopher Lee was a big old badass. So he was like any dude that's 91 who records a heavy metal album is
that's cool, dude.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just one of a long list of reasons why he was a badass. But villains are always way cooler, in my opinion.
Well, they drive the plot quite a bit.
Yeah.
Your heroes build the plot as they go, but your villains are driving the plot.
Yeah, and that's why you really have to do a good job.
Yes.
Designing your villain. Give them some thought. Like, why are they the villain? What makes them villainous? What are their motivations? What do they look like?
What drove them to it?
Yeah. And having a villain that is relatable and, I use the term loosely, like human, even if he may not be. But, why is this person the villain? Like, what drove them to this point? And do they see themselves as the villain, or do they see themselves as kind of like the good guy, for lack of a better term? I mean, those are the really, really cool.
Yeah, their greater good may not be the same as your greater good.
Yeah.
And build some empathy in there.
Yeah, and it's cool to do that, because when you start looking at different aspects of it, you know, I watched The Karate Kid not long ago. It was one of my favorite movies. And I'm like, this Danny kid was a dick. You know, he brought a lot of that stuff on himself. You know, he was kind of a jerk. And when you know, the villains aren't so villainous. It's like, you know what? I would have wanted to punch him in the mouth too. You know, he's kind of a jerk. We all know how I feel about Killmonger.
Well, yeah.
You know,
it's only been mentioned in every other episode.
Yeah, and you know, I think the only like one-dimensional villain who is still like an awesome villain is Khan from The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah,
he was just a bad guy.
He's just a bad guy.
Let's make sure that you're talking about the original Wrath.
The original Wrath, and that.
Yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch is a fine actor. I loved his portrayal of Sherlock Holmes and Smaug and Doctor Strange. But Khan Noonien Singh,
He was not.
no. Damn it, man. That's Ricardo Montalban. But he was kind of one-dimensional, but he was awesome because him and William Shatner had that whole like overacting competition going on. So that was pretty cool. But he wasn't as deep. He wasn't as deep, and they tried to deepen him a little bit and failed in an epic fashion in whatever it was, Star Trek Beyond or
One of those. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It wasn't that good.
it wasn't memorable.
Well, how about Thanos?
Thanos, yeah, Thanos.
There's a very, there was for the greater good.
Yeah,
His greater good was fairly contrary to everyone else's, but
Yeah.
he was doing it for the greater good.
You know, there's too many of you assholes running around screwing things up, so we're gonna
You're all destroying your
gonna-
planet,
yeah.
so I'm going to help you out.
yeah, we're gonna thin the herd a little bit.
Yeah, the culling.
Yeah, and so you're like, yeah, I guess, and then he was like, yeah, I'm gonna be a farmer.
Yeah,
And then here comes Thor and
I just want to sit here
cuts
and
his head off.
I just want to watch the sunset. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm all done. I did my part. Fought my wars. Fought my battles. Yeah, do a good job. It's important that you do a good job. They have to be, you want your PCs to kind of second guess themselves. Am I on the wrong side? You know, I might be. Maybe this person's kind of.
So it sounds like he's trying to say that they need to be really believable.
Yeah, they do. Right. They have to be. It can't. The black hat is cool. And
I don't think so.
But the gray hat is better.
yeah, they there's a time and a place, for the black hat, and the twirling mustache. But once in a while, I think is fine to just have a bad guy for the sake of bad guys. The Nazis in Indiana Jones.
Right.
They were mustache twirling, black hat wearing, bad guys. And that's fun. But you want, if you want a deeper game, you want someone
if you
relatable.
want to go with campy, that's all well and fine. But if you want a little bit more flavor. And as you're building your big bad and you've put all this effort and all this time into the big bad, keep that in mind as you're building your little bads, your minions, your NPCs. Give them a little flavor. And build them with the same thought. Maybe not necessarily the same intensity, but the same thought. Don't cookie cutter everything.
Yeah, you want to have your lieutenants like Sauron, your Uruk-hai, bad guys that Sauron had he had some depth to him. You didn't get a chance to really explore it much in the movies, but in the books, there was plenty of opportunity.
Oh yeah, there's quite a bit in the books.
So that's build a good villain. If you want to do the black hat mustache twirling thing, go ahead. But whenever I go like just plain bad guy and evil, it's usually like an otherworldly threat, like a fiend or a demon or something. Or
the part fits much better that way.
Yeah, it's a little more believable. They're just evil for. Because it's their nature, Now that you got all that, right, you're going to want to put pen to paper.
We are. So let's fill in some blanks, all right? I prefer to write this part a little bit more linear, starting from the back forward And then as I mentioned before, I'll repeatedly go back and make changes and moves as you build your way forward, because everything you build is going to influence everything that comes after it. And you're going back over your stuff quite a few times. Sometimes you don't have to change stuff. Sometimes it's just minute, but it does give a lot more flavor to everything because you're building in layers.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there. It's got to be a living document.
Yes.
I'll write out the entire campaign for our week-long session. But if I'm doing a campaign that's going to take place like weekly over the course of a year, I'll have an outline and I'll maybe do the first 2 months worth of sessions because I don't want to get too far ahead because
things are going to change.
Things are going to change probably a lot in that time frame because players are going to come up with stuff that's way more inventive and way cooler than the stuff that you as the GM came up with. And I like to put that in there. I'm like, wow, I didn't think of that, and that's cool. And I'm going to add that to the campaign, and then the players they eat that stuff up. You know?
See, I told you, I guessed it.
Yeah.
I guessed it.
And feel free to do that. It's not an ego thing. You know what? If the players come up with way cooler stuff than you, and they're going to, use it because they're going to eat it up.
Yeah, grab it and run with it.
Yeah, they're going to love it. So that's how I'll do it. I try to avoid getting my heart set on the small details. You don't want to get too attached to them because those small details are going to change.
Oh, very much.
Yeah, a lot.
Then you got to write your NPCs. Then you're going to want to write out your specific monsters and magic.
Yep,
that you're going to need.
It's a great thing too about the NPCs, Bill, is if anybody needs a hand with any of that, we have an episode on it. So you should probably go.
We do. We have an entire episode on how to build your NPCs.
Yeah, and Bill did his best Miss Doubtfire thing on there. So, you know what? That's even worth listening to just for that part. Bill makes a charming old woman.
Thank you. It's amazing what I can do spontaneously.
Yeah, and pulling those monsters together. One of the things that we like to do is, and we had to out of necessity, not just because we're overly creative, is we had to make brand new monsters.
We made everything from scratch because their players know all the books inside and out.
Yeah.
And nothing's worse when they turn around and go, oh, well, I'm just going to happen to have this because it's effective. I hate that. I really do. And even if they're not trying to metagame, if they know they're going to metagame. So throw a monster at them that they've never seen, they've never heard of. Brand new stuff is great because then they have to discern what the monster can do. And just because they ran into the monster this time and defeated it doesn't mean they've run into all its abilities or all its powers or attacks the second time round. So they're going to try to use the same stuff all over again, and all of a sudden it's not working as well because there are defenses for the blue ones and not the red ones that they didn't know about.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider when you're putting pen to paper, and that's oftentimes you're going through like tons of notes and notebooks and loose pieces of paper, and you're looking at story arcs, and you're building encounters and NPCs and where NPCs fit in and random encounters and maps, and it's a lot. It's a lot, and it can be very, 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 very daunting, and especially to a brand new GM, who's kind of like really. It's easy to get a brand new GM kind of skittish about it because there's so much.
A tad. It could seem more overwhelming.
Yeah,
but you tackle it one little bit at a time.
Yep. Yeah. You said it before. You got to eat that elephant one bite at a time.
Yep. So you do it a little bit at a time, concentrate on one thing, get it done, move on to the next. Then once you got all your pieces, then there's only a few things left to put together. So some of your final tools you're going to need, like soundtracks, charts, tables, maps, handouts. We've mentioned a number of times. Players love handouts.
Love handouts.
Specific notes that need to be passed on with information. If this is a point that you need to move across, now it might be the verbal word of one of the barmaids overheard it at the bar, or it might physically be a note that is being passed on as a communication. However you pass the information on, have it written ahead of time and write it out as a note you're going to pass on in case you need to. Because the information you're passing on may change from one NPC to the other depending on where the characters go, where the story is being going, whether or not your NPCs are going to, or your PCs are going to throw a crazy Ivan and go, no, we're not going to go to that town. We're going to go to the castle over there and sleep there instead. Why? Because it looks cool. It's deserted and there's no food and there's no water. Yeah, but it looks cool. We're going to go sleep there. It's like, crap.
Yep. And because deep down they know.
Yeah.
That you have spent all this time and effort and energy, and they're going to throw you a curveball. Maybe like soundtrack and background sounds are a little much for a brand new GM, but for someone that's been doing it a while, that sort of thing can really add layers to your game.
It definitely amps things up a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's gone a long way towards our games.
Yeah, we both use it.
Yeah, especially for like mood setting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That is really, really good for mood setting. And background sounds, there's a ton of stuff out there available for background sounds, and I think that lends to the immersion. The more you can immerse your players in your game, the better off you're going to be as a GM, and it makes your job easier. We didn't have this stuff.
No.
A million years ago when we started playing. So we had to be really descriptive, and it could be kind of mentally draining and exhausting to just manage all of that, especially if you're doing it for long periods of time.
Right. So we got all our tools together. So time for session 0?
Session 0 is, I didn't do this always. But session 0 is, I think, really important.
I think we've both come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Initially, it was just session 0 was, all right, tonight we're going to make our characters and build some equipment, and we're probably not going to game tonight, but we just want to make sure the characters are all set. And session 0 has developed from that, especially when you're dealing with house rules. And we've gone into this on some of our other episodes on what your character should expect from you and what you expect from your players.
Yeah, that's a good opportunity to kind of lay that out on the table. There's a social contract in D&D and other tabletop RPGs that it's implied. And this is a good opportunity for you to ask questions of your players. Now, we have a pretty good idea of what each of our players wants, and that's not because we're especially insightful, but it's because we've been playing the game with them for so long. I know what people like. So that doesn't take up a lot of time at our session 0s, but
no.
When you have like a new group or a new player, session 0 is really important from a DM perspective. Now, as a player, Lou, what are your thoughts on session 0? I mean, is this a tool that for a player, is it beneficial?
Yeah, of course. You learn a little bit about not only about your character, like you said, you could get the house rules, but it also gives you housekeeping, so you can actually, if there's a potential that you know other players, get their backgrounds, learn about them as you go along, because a lot of times when you're coming into these stories, you're coming into either one, as a small group, or you know other players from, or the PCs from somewhere in the town or something like that. So it gives you a chance to learn their background, so you're not going in cold and stumbling on your feet.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You can establish relationships between characters. It's a good opportunity for your players to kind of give you an idea really of what they're looking for, and vice versa. Like, you don't you don't want to make this big high fantasy epic tale and then, have a couple of your players come in thinking it's a beer and pretzels game where it's,
all I want to do is dungeon crawl.
Right, no, like when we did our Session Zero for the campaign that Gravin was in, everybody got to learn a little bit about everybody's mentality before we even started playing. We knew a little bit, okay, this is what sets them off. This is, how to stay on their good side. Because while we all had a common goal, I don't think a lot of us, or a couple of us, really didn't know any of the other PCs. So it was a good way for us to adjust to the other characters without being surprised, if anything, as well.
Yeah, that's something that's really important. It's like you don't have to find your way after that. It's like, oh, how do I know these people?
Or it's at least easier to find your way.
Yeah, and it's a good opportunity, too, to lay out, the house rules, not just as they pertain to how you play the game, but where you're playing the game. It's like, okay, we're going to bring snacks, or I appreciate it if, you're not on your cell phone all night. I understand, things happen. You may have to take a call or send a text, but, it's those simple kind of
etiquette.
Etiquette.
Etiquette. But more importantly, I think at least for the GM, it lets them know what they can approach and what they can't approach.
That's really,
subjects.
yes. That's really, really, really important. And we had a Session Zero when Mike and Korik and Frank, when we played an online game, and I think Larry was there for a couple of them. So we did a little Session Zero, and Korik plays a female character, and very, very, very tastefully, I might add. This is the topic for another episode, but I find that a lot of times when males play female characters at the table, it's like
something out of their fantasy.
Yeah, they emulate their fantasies.
Yeah, it's a hyper sexualized, adolescent males idea of what a female in a fantasy setting is, and fantasy being the operational word.
Bikini's perfectly acceptable armor.
Yeah, and he does a very, very, very good job with that. But one of the things, what's off the table, Korik said, anything involving like sexual assault, I just don't feel comfortable with, and nor do I, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's things like that, torture of characters. You gotta lay that.
Yeah. When do you fade to black?
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly, and that's super, super important.
Because everybody has a sensitive subject that they don't want to delve into or touch.
Yeah, and you don't. As a GM, you don't want to cross those boundaries either. And folks, if you're playing at a table and the GM, even after you've outlined those things, if your GM is not respecting those boundaries, then you need to find another table.
Absolutely. Because if you already told him and he's crossing those boundaries, and I'm sure the looks in your face have not put forward the point that you need to stop doing this, just pack up and go to another table.
They're not the right GM.
It's not worth the headache.
No. And
don't argue with them. Don't say, hey, don't do this. Maybe it'll be better next week. It won't be. Bail.
Yeah. So always keep that in mind.
We got a few other things to go over
for
Session Zero. How about the theme of the scenario?
Yeah, that's important. Establish what the theme is. It's, is this a serious game, a horror game, epic high fantasy? Mm-hmm. Is this something that's in the vein of, Robert E. Howard or pulpy kind of setting?
Yeah, that's just it. It goes into the setting next, and then from there goes into the timeline. Now, we mentioned the Donnelly Files a few times. This started in 1857 was the year we started, that was the year I was a freshman in college. But that's the year of the setting that we were in. So you're dealing with an older time where technology was not as available as it is in a modern timeline. So you got to set your timeline up, whether it's fantasy, whether it's a superhero world, whether it's in a league of extraordinary individuals. you need to establish that timeline so they know where they're working at. And then another thing, we talked session 0 about a lot of character creation. What about pre-gens?
Yeah, pre-gens that's when you would drop them on the table during session 0.
Here's a whole pot.
That's how we started.
There's a lot of the first couple of years I generated 3 characters for everybody at the table. And these are people that we've gamed with for a while now. Kind of knew what they wanted, so I geared 3 different styles of characters towards one person. And went, here, pick one of these, and then pick one of these. And if you don't like any of them, throw them in the middle of the table, and then pick out of the pile in the middle of the table.
Yep.
I don't think anyone had to choose more than one.
No, and that works out really well. I think if you have like a kind of like a seasoned group of players that already know the
for
rule.
New groups, not so much.
Yeah.
But for seasoned groups, like I said, I was able to gear characters that were different enough to give variety, but similar enough where I knew that the person playing them would be attracted to any of them.
But on the flip side, I think a lot of newer GMs will also appreciate that because I like a lot of the campaigns. The Phandelver and the Ice Mines, they both come with pre-gen characters, or one of them does.
Yep.
I think that's a starter kit.
Yeah, it's a good way to jump into a game.
Yeah, it is. But I think a lot of GMs actually prefer, at least from what I've been reading in the forums, some of them prefer now to go with pre-generated characters because they know what they're going to be in for then.
So you have the chance of reading the characters over, and you're right, like nothing's a surprise for you. You've delved over all the characters before you handed them out. So, yeah, there's definitely a bonus to that.
And perhaps even for the players as well, because if you're a new player...
That's a daunting process.
Yeah, you may not have an idea of what you want to play. I mean, you try to push some pre-gens on a veteran player, and it ain't at a convention, you're going to get some pushback. They'll be like, no, I have this tome that is the back story for my character that I've already written, and this pre-gen does not fall into that, nor do the stats.
Why else would you read these 47 pages I wrote for the background?
Yeah, but that is a good opportunity to drop some pre-gens on the table.
It also
just to save time.
It's also a good time to establish what level you're starting at. Not all tables start at 0, at first level.
Yeah,
you can establish your startup level. Another point is experience point progression. How are you going to award them, and how fast are you going to move? And that should be determined in session 0 as well.
Yeah, are you doing milestone XP, which is my preferred method? I think it keeps the murder hoboing down to a minimum. You don't fall into that that kind of MMORPG thing where you're just look at that, a wolf. Like in World of Warcraft, how many wolves did you kill before you had to kill a bunch of
thousands?
Pigs? Yeah, and just killing shit for XP. And that's the way the game was before. You kill something, you get XP. You take its money, you get XP. You find a magic item, more XP for that. So we killed everything.
There was the birth of murder hoboing.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. 1970 whatever. The murder hobo was born, and we've been dealing with it for the past half a century. But that's a good way to do that is mention it right at that session 0. This is, you could count on fast or slow progression, moderate progression. This is how the XP is handed out, and it's always good to remind them that there are penalties for your actions.
Yes. There are consequences to your actions.
Yes.
Negative experience points have been given out at our tables.
Absolutely.
And the last thing I got is magic level. Is your high magic, low magic? What could you expect? Is magic commonplace in this world, or is it a rarity, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, that's that's something that we established very early on, that we're going to have a low magic world. So don't plan on a lot of magic items. You're not going to have that golf bag of magic items with you.
And believe it or not, I think a lot of us, I know myself, I prefer it that way now.
Yeah, I do too, because it's more, I think it's easier to develop your character. You don't have the crutch of magic.
Right. Yeah, use your skills and use your knowledge.
As to go along with that, I think it promotes more teamwork.
Yep, it does. It does. And I remember, and I'm not going to mention any names, but you know who you are if you're listening. And if you're not listening, you should be, because you're our friend. someone was hoarding magic items, and Bill caught wind of it,
Yep.
and that was it. There was no more hoarding of the magic
I
items.
swept in like a storm out of the north and scoured the lands, the lands of magic. Players, characters, hidden stuff, it all went away.
He
Was it
ran
me?
his pockets. No, it wasn't you.
I was known for blowing them up.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's something too. And so people kind of have an idea, of the world they're playing in, and it's also a good opportunity to kind of introduce the character. This is what I look like. This is what I am.
Exactly.
These are my likes or dislikes, because you want to assume that there's something known about one another.
Some common ground.
Yeah.
Right?
Even if you don't know the person, you may have heard about them. You may have seen them in town. Maybe they have a small reputation in this small local area. It may not be like, oh, that's the greatest archer, but hey, I heard he's pretty good with a bow.
Right.
And this one here is pretty skilled with a sword. And we got to do this stuff. Maybe these are the people I want to be with. Is not Bob down the street, because Bob cut himself 3 times just sharpening his sword. The last thing I want to do is wielding one around. But Reginald over here, he's pretty competent. So I think I want Reginald to come with us.
And that's your campaign, part 1, preparing your epic adventure. That's going to conclude this episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Please subscribe to the podcast for more great content. If you'd like to hear a particular topic, you can reach us on Facebook at the Dungeon Masters Dojo, or you can drop us an email at thedungeonmastersdojo@gmail.com. Thank you, and have a good day.